So I'm Nigel, I'm a brand consultant, and I help to turn a business vision into a brand. And the point of the Brand Lab is to chat about branding. And what I've got today is a series of questions that people have asked me recently about branding that I'm going to kind of go through. And if at any point you've got a question or if it inspires you, hi Lisa, thank you for joining us. Then just shout out, pop it in the comments. It's just me here, so I'll try and keep track of everything. Hi Lisa, welcome to Brand Lab. Do you want to say hello to everyone, if you're willing, just to quick hello, say who you are and what you do?
Hello.
Of
What do I
course you
do?
can.
I'm a graphic designer, so I've been a graphic designer for 30 years, and I've had loads of staff, had a bit, the big agency, and now I'm slowly going retiring a little bit more and taking life a lot easier.
That sounds totally awesome and inspirational because I used to have a big agency, but rather than sort of winding down into retirement, I think I've decided that I'm going to keep going with doing my sort of independent consultancy stuff. Maybe I'll retire one day. So lovely to see you, and thank you for joining. I will just sort of do like the intro bit so that people get a sense of where we're at, and let's say other people may join us as we're coming on. So now, what is Brand Lab about? And it is really about everything brand related. And I sort of worked in branding for 25 plus years. Like Lisa mentioned, I also ran an agency. We had up to, I think, about 25 people at one point. And now I just work totally independently. But I generally believe that branding can seem overly complicated. So I'm sort of trying to demystify that process all the time. And it's sort of like share some of the knowledge that I have, because I know that people who are either brand owners or working in brands, they have the answers. And our job as consultants is to bring that out of them to create clarity for the audiences. So in the past, I've done really big projects like Ford Motor Company. I rebranded that 20 years ago. I've worked independently for 10 years on naming. This is a So Can Sleep is an online retailer. And I've been doing digital apps recently and things like that. So just constantly helping with strategy, naming, identity. And that's sort of where I end. Um, I always start with saying what my definition of a brand is. And everyone, it'd be interesting maybe to hear what everyone else's definition of a brand is, but I talk about emotional connection, the feeling that you've made the right decision about a particular product and service. That's what a brand is starting to work. So for me, Costa Coffee is my favorite hot chocolate. I would never buy Starbucks, but some people may enjoy Starbucks. They think they've made the right choice. I think I made the right choice with Costa Coffee, really. And I have a model. A lot of brand consultants will have different sort of models, pyramids, houses. I've got a brand donut, and this helps me understand a business so that I can create a brand. And it's the typical things talking about the vision, the position, offer, values, mission, and a nice sticky jam core so that what glues everything together. And some of the things that I'm going to share today that I've been asked all sort of fit into this donut. So before I go on to specific questions I've been asked, has anyone got any questions that they would like to ask about branding, or any comments they'd like to make about brands and what they are and what they mean to them? Do you have a favorite brand? Do you know why you love the brands that you love, be it a coffee shop or a pair of trainers?
I mean, with me, it's
Anyone, yeah.
I love Waitrose and John Lewis. I love that sort of style and the way that they're changing, and the way that their stuff is more. The products inside are changing. They're looking at new, like in the food departments. It's quite exciting. Some of the products they're bringing in, they're actually looking at very small individual companies and how they can progress them. And they're helping them with their brands now. So that I really enjoy, sort of watching how they look after their staff and how they progress, and they're having to change with the times. And I probably same as you, after doing in this game for 30 years, branding is so different than it was 30 years ago. And it's probably more important now than it was 30 years ago.
Absolutely, I think that's a really good point and interesting. A lot of those points that you've just made, we will be covering off in terms of some of the questions. So, I think, that sort of, just you even saying the words like, I love what Waitrose do. I mean, that emotional connection, and they could probably bring out almost anything and you'd probably love it. But also the fact that they've recognised that they need to keep on changing and evolving, and they haven't stayed the same. And I think that's good. So I don't, do people look at their products that they bring out too often, or do we just stay with what I've got? So what I'm going to do is share my screen again and just talk a little bit about some of these questions that we have, and they may inspire other questions that you may have about branding. So feel free to jump in at any point. So this was from a meeting I was in the other week. I just sort of said, ask what if you were going to ask a question about branding, what would it be? And the first question I got asked was, how does everything fit together? And this is a visual that I use quite a lot. It's a jigsaw puzzle. And you sort of see it doesn't make a definitive picture, framed picture on purpose, because actually there's so many different elements that go into a brand. This jigsaw could almost go on forever. But I think it's really important to recognize that there's some very specific things. And first off, that there is a vision. The vision is a really important starting point for a brand. And then as you move further to the bottom right, it's all the applications and all the things that you need across the different channels, the visual elements that you need. And if you start to understand that, there's maybe 20, 30, 40 different things that make up a brand, you start to realize that that's why you need to focus on different things at different times. And, I don't do a lot of delivery, I don't do websites and things like that, but I'm sort of comfortable up to creating visual identities and things. But my main focus really is around the insight and the stories. So someone else asked me the question, so why is a brand important? And I've sort of already sort of alluded to this, that if you've got a clear vision for what your business is all about, you might sort of say, right, now I need a website, now I need an Instagram post, now I need a mug to put my logo on. And it's a jump too soon. If you haven't been through some of those other phases, then you won't actually create that emotional engagement as much. So the brand is really important, and the process that we go through actually helps it. I'm just going to let someone else in. And that's really what we're trying to do with branding, is try and make sure there's that link between the vision that we have and the delivery of it. But it can't just be about sticking a logo on a mug. We have to put some more thought and think about every other element. So someone else asked me, how can I be involved in creating the right outcome? So this is a business owner who was sort of saying that, I think he actually said that he'd had a brand and he asked someone to do it for him. This was probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe, to Lisa's point about how things have changed. And he said, I've never really loved it. And I think the reason that he never really loved it is because I don't think he was actually involved in the process. So I'd always encourage business owners to at least get involved in some of the process, like the insight. It's really important. Think about the competition, think about your audience, and think about what that might mean when you're creating the brand. So I always say to people, look at who you admire and why you admire them. Think of, don't just think of direct competition, because they are important, but think of some of those really big famous businesses that are out there, the things that you might aspire to. Also, just think of brands that you love and brands that you admire. I always say to people, what's your favorite brand? I use the example of Adidas because I've always worn their trainers. So what can you learn about the brands that you actually admire and use on a repeated basis? So before I just go to the next bit, which is, let me just stop my screen share. When you think about branding, I don't know if anyone's got a point of view. Do you feel intrinsically that it's important? How do you know that it's important within your business? And what do you do to find out more about it? I'd just be intrigued if anyone's got anything to say on that. Anyone got anything to say? Hi, Steve, welcome.
Hi.
I know you're creative as well. How do you get the business owners involved in the creation of their brands?
Well, I know we talk differently in certain ways, but we have similar approach, obviously. When I'm doing stuff, I like to know about the business, about the person. I like to know about what they kind of stand for. It's good to know, so that I can represent them through what I actually produce, and I can say what they need to say about themselves through their branding or whatever I produce for them.
And actually, yeah, and that leads on to this sort of the next question that someone asked me was about, how can I love my brand? And I think the way that you can get people to love the brand and be more emotional with themselves is focusing around the story. So getting that information out of them, particularly around the values that they have. So everyone, you don't need to get too confused about the difference between vision and mission and stuff, but values that you have, I think, are really important to you as a business owner. And what's important to me, as well as them being important to you as a business owner, is to ensure that they mean something to the customer. So I talk about reflecting your audience needs. So why do they care about your business? So my values are these. My business name is Pin Creative, and they stand for pragmatic, inspiring, and nurture. And they're the things that are really important to me. But I know that if I kind of care about those things, people will get something out of it. So if I'm pragmatic in my approach, they'll get simple, clear instructions. If I'm inspiring, they'll get creative answers. And if I believe, because I believe in nurture, I believe in always learning, I do want people to learn a bit more as they go along. So always think about the values that you have as being a reflection of what customers need. And then you should be more emotionally connected with your business. Another thing that people often ask about is consistency. And again, I'll show you an example, not something that I've done, but when it comes to consistency, this is all around the engagement part of it, the verbal and visual things. And I think there's things that you need to be most consistent on are names, logos, and typefaces. Things like messaging can vary a bit, color and imagery can vary a bit. And I'm just going to show these two ads. One's from 1980. That's a Nike ad from 1980, the dawn of the daybreak. And this is a Nike ad from 2020, so 40 years later, just dropped. And you can sort of see that effectively they're the same advert. Big message, picture of a trainer, even down to some coloring. Interestingly, the one on the right, the latest one, Nike is so famous by that point you don't even need to have the logo on it anymore. But they're not changing lots of things about their brands. I think this is one thing that business owners often do. We get bored of our own brands and our own solutions before other people do. So we start changing things. Go, let's have a different typeface. Let's change the logo. Let's do a different color or something like that. And actually, the more consistent you can be, and remember, Nike is spending billions and billions of dollars, but they are just producing the same thing, but with a different spin on it, a different message, a different way of bringing people into it. But they're not moving things around too much. So just kind of curious to see what people think about that whilst I try and stop my screen share, which I can't do because I've lost my mouse. It's gone. Sorry about this. All right, there we go. We're back. So what do people think about how do you feel about consistency within branding, and do you think it's important? I believe it is, but where do you think you can have a bit of variety?
I tell my clients all the time that you should be consistent because especially with social media, and there's so many different channels that you go to now. If you don't have the right message and you don't have the right look and feel, how's anybody going to know who that brand is and what you stand for? So you've got to keep being consistent.
And how do you stop getting bored of it then? How do you stop getting bored of the brand, your own brand, say?
Well, sometimes I'm working with clients and they've fallen out of love with their business, and it's actually doing a bit of psychology with them. And sometimes is to get them that passion back into the business. Why did they set the business up in the first place? There's got to be a reason why they do it. They started that business. So it's getting them and talking to them about that, and actually build their passion up and their emotions about their brand as well. And that look and feel should be coming out. Nike has never really changed.
Not really,
as you were saying, Apple has never really changed.
No.
But they're massive brands. But I do a lot of work like personal branding with clients as well. and especially if they're a one-off company. So it's getting them to know what their true values are, and putting that out there.
And I think I think you might have said it as well, but it's like we get bored of our own stuff well before our audiences do. We see it all the time. They only see it every now and then in amongst millions of other images they see on a constant basis. So, if you are a brand owner and if you are thinking of doing your own stuff, consistency is really going to help you. Things that I think you can have a bit of variety in is message. So you can kind of have different messages, but again, a lot of the famous brands will have a repeated message that you keep seeing. And you could probably have a little bit more fun with photography. I know Steve does photography, and then sometimes, yes, you might have hero images, but you could probably move the imagery around. But some of the cornerstone things like your typeface, try and choose as least as possible. So so that's a bit. That was a question about consistency and why it's important. Now, before I move on to something slightly different, which is about employee engagement, which is another question I got randomly asked. I mean, that's sort of kind of going through some of the basics behind the tools and the elements that make up a brand. I'm just curious to see if anyone has got any questions they want to ask about that before I move on.
I think people they do get attached to brands.
Yeah.
Customers, they actually get so emotional on, those back in the day we had wore this, or like UW, they dropped the pig, and I've still got my because I had loads of pig business cards, and whenever I give it to somebody, they say, that's a nice card. I say, what's the old card? But the pig is still really nice, but we've dropped it, but it's got my name, my number on it. The website's a bit different address. But it's sort of coming, it had to be changed because it wasn't serving that. So
it's an interesting point, because like you say, so UW, Utility Warehouse, the company that Rima has, I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds like they had a cute little pig as their mascot, and at some point
we just toy. I've got one. I've got the toy one as well.
They've changed it, and I'm sure when they started with that, it was very successful. People loved it. But do you think people love the brand? So there'll be people who remember that, and the people who don't remember it. Do you think people who are new to the brand think, oh, we should have a little pig? Probably not.
No. I just remember I had a T-shirt and it had the pig on, and the way it was done, it had the little flaggy. I said, I'll have to show you. And my mum said, oh, that's a really nice logo. And my mum had really good taste. And I just thought, there. But we dropped it. But that's my vintage. I'll keep it keep it for posterity.
So it's like the archive of great logos that we've lost and loved. And again, I'm going to talk a bit about the evolution and why you might evolve things. And I suspect, actually, then when they were trying to, I think there was a whole period of branding utility-based companies where, like BT with its Busby and stuff like that, where animals were like a go-to kind of vernacular for actually making these things feel more personable. And maybe Utility Warehouse probably then saw how other utility companies had changed. So British Gas, they lost their little friendly, I can't even remember what the character was, you might remember. They had a name for their flame. And they've gone a bit more corporate. So you've gone with them to sort of align yourselves with them rather than be as distinct. And it's not surprising. So back to my jigsaw, that's all within positioning. EW are positioned themselves with the people that they're trying to talk around, because it makes other people feel more comfortable. And that's quite a common thing that happens across branding when people are sort of following. And I think it's probably the right thing for them to have done. So just going back to a question I had, which is a very different sort of question. I had this question about how to engage employees so that they can also love the brand and help deliver it as well. I think the chap Tim, he'd worked at Orange, and he said it's all very well they had all these guidelines and all this sort of great stuff about the brand, but 80 to 90% of it is to do with the employees, and they were the ones sort of delivering and stuff. And again, this does start back to the vision, and when I'm just going to sort of very sort of top level talk about employee engagement. because it comes from the same point. You have to start with a clear vision. This is the whole thing. If your business doesn't have a vision, your employees are not going to be able to get on board. You first got to engage your employees with it. So have a conversation, have a dialogue with them, make sure they're inputting into it as well as going to be living with it. If you don't get them on board earlier on, you're going to really struggle. Doing that will slowly, over time, change the behaviors of the employees. They will start to believe it more, be able to talk about it more, reflect it more. And eventually that will then start to connect with customers. You'll get that sort of bang. It'll take a while. For big organizations, it might take years and years, but you'll start to connect with customers, and then customers will start to understand the vision, because it's coming from the mouths of the employees rather than actually from the kind of corporate world of the the sort of head office and stuff like that. And if you can get employees to start believing in the vision, that's going to take you a lot further. And the same thing happens even if you're working in a much smaller business. When I had a business of 20 odd, it was really important that everyone believed in the culture but contributed to it. For those that want to go into a bit more detail, this sort of journey, it's all about making people aware of it to begin with. You've got to tell people what it is, make it really, really clear, and get them involved. Then you've got to actually give them a bit more depth and reason for believing in it. So you've got to tell them much more information. You've got to get kind of the senior teams more involved so that they will slowly understand, they've been made aware, what the vision for this business is all about. And then actually people over time become much more committed to doing this, because it starts to become slightly more ingrained in the work and the culture. And so this sort of notion of being committed to what the business is doing, and I want to take part. And it won't happen if you just say, this is what you need to say now. You've got to go on that sort of journey, awareness, understanding, commitment, and then finally it'll be a more active kind of involvement that you'll get from employees that will want to be part of it. It is embedded into everything. So if you've got a business, you can still do this. If you're like, if there's just 2 or 3 of you, you can make people aware of what your vision is, engage them in dialogue, help them understand it more, slowly build that into them being more committed, and then in time make it more active part of the business. Don't just sort of throw it in there so that people kind of just have to deliver it. As soon as you start saying, this is our new business vision, deliver it, they'll lose interest because they haven't been part of it. I don't know. Maybe we'll just sort of stop there and see if anyone's got any experience of, I think a few of us have worked in bigger firms before. I know Brian has, because not just because he's nodding his head. Did you ever work when you were working there where you just said, hey, here's our brand, go and live it, here's a t-shirt, get on with it?
That was more or less their approach, yeah.
And how did that feel?
It was interesting because most people were proud to work for the particular organisation. So whether we bought into the brand before, but what I was thinking there was they went through a tough time. We're talking about KPMG. They went through a tough time in the financial crisis between 2008 to 2011, and they bought partners in rather than promoting from within. And that changed the culture of the organisation, but also the delivery of the message, because the new partners who had been brought in didn't have the same training in delivering the brand as everybody else. And KPMG have now got themselves into a right pickle, because when I joined them back last century now, good God, they were the second of the then big 6 consultancies. They're now the fourth of the big 4, right, because their brand has become very diluted.
Sorry, my door keeps banging. And so, as an employee, you obviously, your role, you weren't in the brand team. I know that.
No.
Do you feel that they did engage you with the brand and want you to?
Yes, I mean we had big events funny enough, a couple of 100 meters from where we both sit in the O2, and to get you involved with the brand. Where we, and to an extent, you were involved in developing it. But then it became complicated in delivering it. In that, you had to, all the documents had to be in a particular typeface, and the KPMG 4 blue boxes had to be a particular size and a particular position on the page,
and so that's like a big firm, and all those sort of very tight rules. Lisa, if I could ask, when you were running your business, I don't know how many people, how important was your employee engagement kind of activities and things? I can answer for me, but was that something
very, because you need that bond between you and what your agency stands for. So yeah, we used to do a lot of stuff socially as well, because I think that bonded you. And it was just, you had that interaction. My door was always open. So if anybody wanted to come and talk to me, if they had a problem or anything like that, or they had a problem with each other, then it's having that openness. And if there was, because I did find that because it was a good company to work for, it actually attracted better designers because they wanted to be part of the team. So if you can build a brand and people start talking about the company as such and how good it is to work, then that attracts better people into your business.
Yes, a sort of self-fulfilling thing. Get excited there, and that was always a good recruitment policy for a creative agency. If you got an engaged team, and they're saying, "Come and work," we want to come and work, get people in to work with us, and it's always, you're going to help build the culture. Has anyone else anything to add around employee engagement? I'll give you a sort of story, almost a success story, but almost the opposite of that. When we had our agency, and one of the projects we did was to launch the world's first 5G technology brand. It was launched in Russia. Don't talk about that too deeply, but it became really successful and really popular really quickly. It was the most searched Google brand term within a year or so, and the number one place that young people wanted to work with across Russia. This was about 10 years ago. The business was called Yotta. And we'd kind of created the brand and the logos and the colours and the visual style. And it just really attracted a lot of young people because it was new, exciting, buzzy, 5G. They hadn't had 4G. So they'd skipped from 3G to 5G and experienced this whole new world of modern telecommunications. And the issue was that, actually it was 2G to 4G, not 5G. Got that wrong. The issue was, so they'd skipped 3G, so they'd really gone from brick-like phones to what we used to have a few years ago, just 4G phones. That people got so excited about it, they all wanted to work for Yotta. So it was great. They won awards. Most wanted to employ a brand company or whatever. But they just ended up with a whole bunch of really young, inexperienced people. And it just went out of control a little bit. They had real problems all the time trying to manage this team of hyper-engaged young people, but the management couldn't really sort of get a grip around what to do with it. So maybe that's sort of what happens sometimes. So I'm going to talk next about brand transformation a little bit. I mean, we talked about consistency, and this is a question that I was asked in that same group. They wanted to know about, when is a good time to transform a brand or to evolve a brand. And I'm just going to show a couple of examples here. So I think the number one thing about when looking back on the times when I've had to evolve a brand, and I've done it many times, it's often around when the offer is changing. So when you're doing something that's maybe significantly different, or when you're trying to refine what it is that you've already got. And as much as we've talked about how well Nike and Apple have done in being consistent, they've been refining things all through, just that they're very subtle, people know that I did the Ford logo. It's very subtle what I did to it. It cost them £1 million. I didn't get paid that much, but it was a very subtle, important change. And the two examples I'm going to give are more recent, like some of the smaller companies that I've worked on. So this is an organization called DAPW, Duvet and Pillow Warehouse Company. So they had a few issues really, is that they were quite lost in a crowded marketplace, online bedding retailer, basically. Duvets, pillows, effectively sold from a warehouse. So it wasn't very inspiring, and they're up against, all the big players like IKEA and John Lewis, like I've already mentioned. And so I worked with them to basically, their evolution was to get a new name, and came up with an idea around just talking about enhancing relaxation time. So they had plans to maybe expand their offer. So we'll do things in the bedroom, we'll do bathrooms, homewares, things for your garden. And we went, no, let's just really focus in on bedrooms and bathrooms, because these are moments in time when you want to enjoy yourself. Busy day, you've got a hard start to the morning or whatever, you want to enjoy these moments. So enhancing your relaxation time is sort of brand call that I came up with. And that then led on to the name for them, Soak and Sleep. And Soak and Sleep went within a year to being more recognised by which than John Lewis and IKEA as doing bedroom and bathroom, purely because they'd focused a little bit more on their offer and crucially giving it a name that was going to connect with their audience. Now, I think what's interesting for this has evolved since. They've now gone back more into the sort of pilot high cheap market than they used to be in. This was much more positioned as a sort of lifestyle kind of white company type thing when we did this about 10 years ago, 8 years ago. And now they've kept the name though. I don't think they will ever evolve that name again, but they will keep on evolving their visual identity. I'm just going to share one more example. And it's a sort of similar thing. CARDA, Coordinated Action Against Domestic Abuse, a very well-established charity, but they were really kind of unknown. They were working hard, they were doing great, what we call second-tier support to charities around domestic abuse, but they needed to be more well-known to get their message out there. The name was hard to say, hard to spell, all those classic things. So again, work with them much more centrally on what their brand core was. And they actually, this wasn't me just, but I helped bring it out with them, is that rather than focus on a very specific area of, they were going to focus on an area of domestic abuse that isn't that often talked about, which is about the impact on all the family rather than just on, women, which had been a big subject, and there's lots of charities out there that support it. So they'd sort of broaden their message to encompass all the family. I helped them kind of develop that into this core idea. And then that led quite quickly to a new name, Safe Lives. And then within a few years, they're now, I read about them much more often now, because people understand who they are and what they do much more often, and the importance of work and working with young people, working with older people who are being abused, and all that sort of side of it. But they've now gone from CARDA, which was kind of almost invisible, to something which is much more visible. So just going to pause there a second, and any thoughts about, whether you need to evolve your own brands or brand evolutions that you've enjoyed, or even like Rima's mentioned, somewhere where they got rid of the funny pig. But how do you feel about evolution of brands? Anyone? Any thoughts to add to that? It's fine.
There's a lot of brands, quite a few of them sort of organizations like that, the sort of like initials that are quite like, don't mean anything, but when you have like safe lives, that it actually, you can understand it, whereas just initials, just don't. And
I think that's because, when CARDA first started, they probably thought they were being helpful in getting a long message into something and trying to pack everything in. And once you unpacked it, Coordinated Action Against Domestic Abuse, it became quite a complicated thing to talk about and remember. And brands have definitely evolved to make that a bit more direct and a bit easier and a bit kind of more says what it does on the tin type thing, but in a sort of shorter way.
It goes back to basics, doesn't it? When because if you've got a brand new business, and you haven't really done anything yet, you've got a low budget to produce something. You need to get something fast, and actually that thing is actually a really big job to do. So
I mean,
they do it
yeah,
quickly, and then
it's a very good point, because often when a business is starting out, they can't afford, they haven't really evolved what their offer is enough to really evolve what their brand should be. And I don't work with a lot of startups at all. I work with brands and companies that have probably been around the block at least once, so that actually they've got a groundwork in what they need to do to move them forward. And that really, even if it's an independent, if they've been, sometimes, I've just worked with an independent coach. She's been doing it for 8 years, and she's never really done anything about her brand. She's got a logo that I think a cousin did, or type thing, but I work with her just to help develop that into something a bit more strong and a bit more solid. But because she'd been doing it for 8 years, she had a really good idea what she was doing with it, so it really helped to then create the right sort of visual representation. So they were the questions that I got asked in this meeting the other day. And then my answers. No one from this meeting is actually in this meeting. They were just in a different meeting. And they said, well, this is what I'd want to ask. So I guess point in Brand Lab is to have a conversation. If you've got anything to ask me. If not, I'll leave it on the final thing that I always do in Brand Lab, which is band news. I talk about a record. So has anyone got any questions that they want to ask me whilst we're here? Jacqueline, hello.
Hi. So with the branding consistency and especially for smaller business owners that you work with, like you mentioned, the coach, I've been finding a lot that with the small business owners and even nonprofit organizations that have been around for a long time, they'll have an immediate need for the videos that I create, but then they know that their branding needs to evolve. So a lot of times, the pre-interviews that I do with them, which informs what we're going to say in the video, which kind of shares their values and their brand story. The brand story is developed in the video process because they weren't, they either don't have, they're newer to their business, so they don't have that all developed yet, or if they're like an organization that I'm working with right now has been around since like early 70s and they want to completely change it, but they're prioritizing the video for a specific reason. I'm just curious if you have a suggestion that I can then suggest to these people for like either building like a partnership with someone who does what you do, where we work in tandem, or how like I can help them with that, because then it becomes they have to redo parts of the video later.
Yeah. So I suspect it is, and I think I totally hear what you're saying. So it's a bit chicken and egg, because it's sort of evolving things live, and also you are setting things in stone by committing it to video. On a website, a web page, you can just easily change the text later, and I think that is a tricky thing. At the same time, depending what kind of videos you're doing, it may be that there's something in the edit and the way that you put things back together, that it's not just all straight single shot, one face to camera, that means it's a dialogue, so that there may be parts of it that as you storyboard it you could actually chop up again and add change things later. But I would probably say that the brand probably stems from the content of that video anyway, so what the person, the business owner, is saying is going to inform what the brand story is. And the brand story as an articulation of that doesn't necessarily need to be set in stone as a logo or a strapline type thing. But there may be an output from it. So whatever they've talked about, that you may be able to create some visual representation that just goes front and back, that actually then just brings it to life. Don't get them wearing a t-shirt with a pig on it throughout that video if you think the pig might go later. I mean, that's literally the thing. Right. Don't commit any visual elements into the video, but you can top and tail it with the things that are reflected back. So actually what
Okay.
would probably happen, no one would really notice if that however long the video is, 3 minutes, and it's an interview and there's words there. So if when you then went to the website and there was some content written, if the content has come from the core of that video, they won't notice if the words are completely different, because the sentiment will be the same. The sentiment, and this is why when we talk about branding, you know, the vision and the brand call, the sticky jam bit is the bit that doesn't ever change, really, because that's your inner truth, if you like, as a business owner. So you always are going back to that as the starting point. So the video, if it's talking around those bigger concepts, now it gets very difficult. If you start talking about the offer, back to my donut, and then the offer changes every 5 minutes, probably don't put it in a video. Ask them to talk about those bigger concepts, the bigger ideas that make their business really exciting, and then reflect it visually. Hope that helps.
Excellent. Okay, yes, that's very helpful.
Excellent. Well, has anyone got anything they want to know whilst we're still here? I mean, what I'm going to do is gift you some time back in your day instead. But if anyone's got any questions, I always end with band news as opposed to brand news. And this week, I'm just going to, because I often have this record here. And as those of you who've met me before, I'm always talking about records and music. And I just thought, actually, it's probably about time I talked about the record that is 9 times out of 10 up there. Not just from a video continuity point of view, but just because I know it's my default one. If anyone says, "Why have you got that record there?" I can say, "Well, it's my favourite one." So are people familiar with this album? Still there because I've got multiple copies. Are you familiar with this album? So this is an album by a band called New Order, and it's the album Technique, and it came out in January 1989. So it's quite an old album, really, but it was very sort of new at the time. They recorded it in Ibiza. And I picked this, actually, I thought I'd talk about this today because of Glastonbury Festival was just on, and going to see New Order at the Reading Festival was my first music live experience. So I was sort of kind of reminiscing about days spent in muddy fields listening to bands and things like that. It's a fantastic album. They don't often play any of the hits of it because it's all a bit, those that know, acid house music style, but it's ultimately my favourite album, particularly, and I played it the other night in the pub. I do a DJ thing, played Fine Time, which was the New Order song that I saw when I first saw them live at Reading. So I would make that your recommendation. I'll drop a link into the follow-up email if you want to relive my memories of being at a festival as a teenager. But New Order Technique, 40 minutes long. Anyone can spend 40 minutes. This has taken 49. We could have just sat and listened to this and still had 9 minutes spare. But anyway, so that's my recommendation. So thank you very much for joining. If you've got any questions, please reach out to me at any time. I will pop a video replay link out the next couple of days. Probably not tomorrow because I've got to do a presentation. So thank you very much for your attendance, and see you at the next one, which is always the last Tuesday of the month. And I've got no idea what that is, but I'm sure I'll send you an email in advance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
It's really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nigel.